Good morning and welcome to the Nature Conservancy's California Determining Decade Town Hall. We're very fortunate today to have Congressman Jared Huffman joining us for a town hall discussion to take your questions and thinking about our environment and climate change amid this COVID crisis. And I want to take a moment to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule to participate in this discussion with us. We know this is a very challenging time. All of us are learning new ways of communicating, new ways of working, trying to figure out how we deal with our day-to-day lives in a very unprecedented moment. And Congressman Huffman, thank you for taking time to join us. I want to just say a couple words about the Nature Conservancy here. The Nature Conservancy was founded in 1952. The Nature Conservancy is now in 79 countries around the world. We are making a big difference in conserving more than 120 million acres of lands around the world and 173 million acres of critical ocean habitat. In California, we have been on the scene for more than 60 years. Our work here encompasses the conservation of more than 1.5 million acres directly in our work, and 1.8 million acres of ocean habitat out there. And we are very fortunate today to welcome our California Board of Trustees, our California Leadership Council, our conservation professionals, and strategy leads, many of whom have worked directly with Congressman Huffman over the years in his tenure in the legislature, as well as now in the Congress. And this is an exciting moment for us. We have a lot moving forward. The reason we are calling this the Determining Decade is that we really have just 10 years to turn the trajectory of the planet and really begin to get on a much more sustainable track in managing natural resources and addressing the challenges of climate change, both for people and for nature. We're going to begin with some introductions. My colleague Liz Forsberg will be handling a number of your questions. You will see a little bar down in the bottom right of your screen to formulate questions and send those on to Liz, and we will be putting those in the queue. So do push that Q&A feature button. And Liz will be able to do that in plugging all your questions in today as best we can. And I appreciate the energy of our guest, and I will try to be as succinct as possible to get through as much as we can today, because we really do have a full slate with Congressman Huffman, who represents the 2nd District in California. That district extends from Marin County through Mendocino, Del Norte, Humboldt, Trinity, and Lake counties, I believe, are also in there. And we have been active on the ground in Congressman Huffman's district from his time in the legislature, and which began in 2006 through 2012, to his tenure in Congress, which began in 2013. And he is just a fantastic member of Congress from the Nature Conservancy's perspective, and we really kind of refer to him as the Congressman for Nature. He is he sits on the Senate, or the House Natural Resources Committee, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the Select Committee on Climate Crisis, and he also chairs the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. And this committee has the best tag is the WOW committee from our perspective in getting things done. And it has jurisdiction over federal water projects, fisheries management, coastal oceans policy, and wildlife management and endangered species. So it is really, really a pleasure to welcome Congressman Huffman to our Determining Decade Town Hall today. Congressman Huffman, how are you doing in all of this COVID adjustments out there?
Well, I'm hanging in there, Jay, and it's great to be with you and with members of the Nature Conservancy team. Thanks for being a keeper of the flame, really, for TNC and the good work that you do. This COVID crisis has really forced a lot of workarounds on all of us, and so we're all adapting our work and our daily routines to this unusual situation. But I'm hanging in there and just really trying to get my subcommittee and the Congress back on the field so we can continue our work. That's been a real challenge for these last couple of months. And I'm really glad to see you doing the same thing for TNC. And let me just take a moment to thank all of you for the many years of collaboration and good work. I have just really enjoyed working with you as partners for nature. And when you describe my district, you're describing an awful lot of good work that TNC has done and continues to do right now in Northern California. So thanks for that.
Yeah, well, and I know this COVID crisis has also had a personal impact as well. That I know that your mother-in-law was diagnosed with COVID-19, and how is she doing now?
She's doing just fine. She's in a nursing home in Texas, and you've heard about how congregate living facilities are often hotbeds. So yeah, she did get COVID-19, has recovered, and a lot of people have it worse.
Yeah, we've lost a friend at one of the Pleasant Hill facilities in the East Bay. So it's just one of those moments where every moment is precious, and we have to recognize that in our moving forward. You talked a bit about some of our early work together. One of the most exciting things we did sitting down was, why can't we do these fisheries restoration projects a lot faster? And let's develop a new track for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and working together on that Assembly Bill 1961 some years ago to accelerate stream bed permitting for restoration. And can you talk a little bit about your passion for fisheries in this?
Well, I like to fish, and I really love rivers and streams and those environments. And so there's a personal connection to that work. And I happen to represent some places that are just really spectacular resources. So all kinds of reasons why I have enjoyed diving in and doing that work with you. And yes, we not only did some important streamlining for restoration work in Northern California, but we renamed the department the venerable old Department of Fish and Game. And I still have some old timers that curse me for that, but I think we did the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it reflects the wider public trust resources that the department has to manage in a state with 40 million people. And I think that reality just in, changing the brand has a big impact. And you're right about that. I think we've got a deeper consciousness for the full spectrum of work that the department does beyond just the fishing and the game part of it. So appreciate your leadership to get that moving. Turning to an issue that we've worked on pretty actively with you and your staff, and again, the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee is probably the focal point for TNC's work in the Congress. I mean, we almost, I feel guilty sometimes, we probably wear our welcome out in your office, but
no, never.
But
not at all.
It's such a hub of critical activity across really our full portfolio. And as you know, one of the areas that's been a challenge to build a broad consensus in is management of forests. And I think you've been helpful at getting us to help other environmental groups and other folks to understand the need to actively manage nature and the forest to bring back and protect the natural wildlife habitat and reduce the risk of these mega fires. Can you talk about where you think we are in political consensus on the approach that we've been working on together on forests?
Well, I think we're definitely making some progress. And if I could, I'll come right back to that. But you mentioned my subcommittee, Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. I need to thank the Nature Conservancy for helping me create the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee, because when the Democrats took the majority after the 2018 election, there was an effort, but mainly led by committee staff at Natural Resources, to kind of parcel out some of these jurisdictions and to force me as one of the likely subcommittee chairs to choose between oceans and wildlife, and not to combine them into this one, really super subcommittee that has so much of what we care about in the environmental community. We had to lobby for that, and it was a bit of a fight, but we prevailed, and I put my foot down and I said I want water, oceans, and wildlife together. And I think it's a great success that we've combined those jurisdictions, and now we can do all of that good work in that way. So thank you. I know that you were part of that effort behind the scene to try to overcome the resistance to that. But on forest management, one of the reasons I do think we're making progress is that groups like TNC are out there doing this work on the ground with some unlikely coalition partners and demonstrating that you can have these working landscapes. They can operate for multiple benefits, including fire resiliency and improved watershed yield and all of these other things that we talk about. And I think that demystifies it a little bit. We're always going to have some friends, in the environmental community that don't ever want to cut trees. And I appreciate the fact that you all have worked in that space where you understand that working landscapes, if they're done really right to high standards, are really good for the environment, and that's the way we need to move our forest management and rangeland management and other working landscapes.
Now, as we scale this up, we'll have some challenges too. We'll be using more fire on the landscape, which creates some smoke and nuisance claims there. We'll probably end up also using herbicides to do some of this work. And, we're trying to carefully manage all of that. But can you help us? I mean, how do we get that next step? How do we make people feel confident in the safeguards? And how do we bring everybody together that this is the right path forward?
Well, it's not going to be easy. And I think our best chance of doing that, frankly, is the credibility, the science-based approach and the brand that TNC brings to these endeavors. I think most environmentalists understand that you aren't in love with pesticides and herbicides, but if you're suggesting we need to use them in very specific applications in very careful ways, that goes a long way toward assuring people that this isn't a bad thing. I'm really grateful that you're in that coalition, and that it's not some industry-led effort where we wouldn't have that comfort level with how the herbicides would be used. I'm using that as an example, but I think the TNC brand is a powerful part of making all of this succeed, because you bring along a lot of folks who would otherwise be skeptics of some of these efforts within the environmental community.
Yep. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. I do feel like your leadership also inspires water agencies to get more active in this space. We've got this great partnership with the Placer County Water Agency. We're making some headway with Yuba County Water Agency, and hopefully to continue to move up those watersheds will yield more partners and bringing this to scale, and thinking about what are the other tools that help us prevent these horrific mega fires, and just the reality that our forests aren't going to come back like they are now unless we really kind of undo a lot of the clear-cut practices that created sort of these even age management challenges out there across the landscape. So, hey, as we're on the context of thinking about scaling up and resources, you've been working hard on thinking about environmental stimulus ideas as an element and getting around the corner on COVID-19. How are you feeling about I know it's not the next bill, but how are you feeling about our prospects for getting an environmental stimulus to invest in forest health and green infrastructure and some of the other critical areas that need support and funding?
Well, I think if we can get a genuine stimulus on the table, and we've called some of the things we've done so far stimulus, and I think we've misused that term. What we've really been doing is triage. All of the congressional responses so far have been about trying to staunch the bleeding of both the public health crisis on the front line for healthcare workers and hospitals and clinics and state and local governments that are bearing a lot of those costs, watching their revenues go off a cliff. So I think so far there's been very little stimulus and an awful lot of just lifelines for all of those needs. But very soon, I think we're going to have to change the conversation to how we revive basically an economy that's gone into a coma. And that's where infrastructure comes in immediately. And if we're going to be doing infrastructure, and if we're going to make sure that we're doing it in a smart, forward-looking way that's climate resilient and green, we got to look at our natural infrastructure too. So that's our opening. I feel confident that we're going to be able to do some things, certainly at a minimum, some of the backlog on parks and public lands maintenance. That's something Republicans have even expressed a willingness to support. You've seen what the Senate has done on a big public land funding initiative that we could fold into that effort. I hope we can go even further though. And I'm selfishly looking at my Northwest California Wilderness Recreation and Working Forest Act, which I know that you have helped push along so far, and we've passed that out of the House of Representatives now. You talked about the kind of creative forest management. We're setting aside a special restoration area in the South Fork Trinity and the Mad River watershed that'll provide about 600,000 acres that are exactly what you described, places that were clear cut, replanted in these plantation, even age, very unhealthy, very fire susceptible manners. And we need to restore those areas, and they'll create jobs, and they'll make us more fire resilient, and we will improve coho salmon habitat and other environmental values along the way. So we've got some opportunities. I'm excited, and it'll be between now and the end of the summer, I think, that'll determine whether we can make this happen.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're in 100%. So whatever we can do to help move this, we want to be an appendage to provide a catalyst for this. So we look forward to continuing to work with you and your staff in that. I'd like to turn also to kind of think about how we, a lot of the success that you've had has been in a sense that pivot on one of the last great Republican environmentalists who represented your part of the world, State Senator Peter Baer, when environmental issues really were bipartisan. And one of the things that you have said to me that's really resonated is you want to bring back Republicans to support these issues. And can you just talk a little bit about your efforts in the Fisheries Caucus and other forums to really grab a mantle of bipartisanship around environmental issues again?
Well, I am certainly trying to do that, Jay, and I appreciate the question. And I know that TNC has a long history of just ignoring partisan politics and doing good work for nature, and that's really what it should be all about. But the difficult reality is that there aren't too many Peter Baer Republicans left. In fact, there's almost none left, and the Republican Party itself has essentially ostracized any Republicans that continue to think that way. So they're not welcome within their own party the way they used to be. And, we've just become so tribal and so polarized. But I think you never stop trying. And so a couple of ways in which I've done that. You mentioned marine fisheries. I am determined to reauthorize the Magnuson Act, which is the keystone federal law for managing marine fisheries. And, this is an area that was never partisan historically. It's always been strongly bipartisan and really nonpartisan. And yet in recent years, like just about everything else. It's gotten hijacked with all these other agendas to go after the Antiquities Act or to go after marine sanctuaries or the ESA. And so efforts to reauthorize it have stalled because of that infusion of politics into it. So when I became chair of this subcommittee with jurisdiction over marine fisheries, I wanted to try to reset the conversation. And I thought a good way to do that is it's not just the substance we put forward, it's the process. And so I have undertaken this national listening tour where I go around to every region in the country that has a Marine Fisheries Management Council. And I have these listening sessions. I invite Republicans, I invite people of all persuasions. And so you've certainly got some provocative voices that come to the table, but I want everyone to be heard. And I want to bring science to the conversation. And I've invited Republican colleagues, and some of them have shown up for these listening sessions. And my working assumption here is that we can reset the conversation and take some of the politics out of it. And I think it's working. So when I get that draft bill and reintroduce it, I think it's going to be really hard for my Republican colleagues who constantly want to foment this polarization to say that I'm playing politics or to say that I'm being partisan. And so I think by staking out that high ground, we do our part to make it better. I'm doing the same thing right now in response to the COVID-19 crisis. I had a virtual hearing yesterday, and I went out of my way to invite Republicans. And bear in mind, my ranking member is one of the most bombastic partisans you will find in the universe, Tom McClintock. And I went out of my way to reach out to Tom and to say, I want you to join me on this. We're going to pick a nonpartisan subject, how the pandemic is affecting fishing communities. I'm going to give you full participation and help pick the panelists and participate like we would in an official hearing. There's nothing partisan about this. And a bunch of his members RSVP'd that they wanted to join me because, they represent working waterfronts that are getting hammered. So this was shaping up pretty good. And then the Republican leadership put out a fatwa and said, no, you cannot cooperate with Democrats and you must stand down and not participate. And NOAA Fisheries, who had initially said they wanted to join us, pulled out. All the Republicans who had RSVP'd pulled out. And Tom McClintock wrote a fire-breathing letter to me that said that if our founders back in 1789 had intended Congress to meet virtually using video technology, they would have said so. So that's where we are, Jay. It's not a happy report, but I'm going to keep trying.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for this. I think candidly, as we've discussed in the past, the fishermen really are ahead of the curve on this. As you know, our efforts have really been focused on data modernization, focusing on certain parts of the industry and trying to expand adoption of data sharing, real-time fisheries management on the water to stay away from sensitive overfished species and focus on those that aren't. And so we really, we appreciate your driving this to a modernization of the Magnuson Act, if you will, and really thinking about how we use technology more effectively on the water with fishermen buying into it and really driving their market. And I think that's a corner that we really do need to get around.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to open it up at this point. Liz is flagging me that we're getting quite a few questions in. I do want to thank our Board of Trustees, the Leadership Council, our Nature Conservancy staff team that's providing, again, a lot of the intellectual work that we're trying to bring to the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Committee staff and Congressman Huffman. And for those of you that haven't found it yet, it's a question tab down in the lower right-hand corner. And with that, Congressman, let me turn it over to another familiar face for you, my colleague Liz Forsberg, to help manage some of the question flow we're getting in here. Thank you.
Right. Hi, Liz.
Great. Good morning, Congressman. We have a couple of questions on climate change. So I'll start with a broader one, and then we'll get into a more specific question. So the first one is, California has been a leader in addressing the global challenges of climate change. Do you see the COVID-19 crisis having an effect on how people think about air pollution and climate change?
Potentially. I think all of these cross-cutting impacts of the COVID-19 crisis, I'm not sure whether this will settle out as something that really helps our climate efforts or something that sets us back because of what it's doing to the economy, basically. But there will be some opportunities. And, the fact that folks in Southern California can actually see mountains and snow, and that we have clean air, and we have some at least anecdotal and very interesting evidence of wildlife resilience. Those are positive things. Our fishing communities right now are largely staying in the ports because there's no demand for their product. They can't sell through restaurants right now, and so any overfished or threatened fisheries are going to get a little bit of relief just by virtue of this economic downturn. Now, that's not a great thing for people and for the economy, but maybe there's a way in which it inspires people to do more to protect nature. I think the one way in which it could be beneficial is that this pandemic really exposed how important science is, and how we really just have to step up collectively and respond using science and actual facts if we're going to save ourselves from situations like this. And I think the climate crisis lends itself to a really similar argument that I hope will be apparent to people going forward.
Congressman, can you talk a little bit about the work of the Select Committee on the climate crisis? We didn't really touch on that, and I know that's an important area of work for you.
Sure. Yeah. So the Select Committee, chaired by Kathy Castor of Florida, spent a year and a half holding all kinds of hearings and meetings. And the culmination of our efforts, according to our charge from Speaker Pelosi, was to be a report that was supposed to be issued at the end of March. Now, obviously, the pandemic hit, just about everything in Congress was shelved. And so our report, while it was substantially finished, I mean, I have a huge 3-ring binder that is the draft report from the Select Committee. It was held back. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that doing anything not directly related to the pandemic right now politically strikes some people as a little tone deaf. So the timing needed to be reconsidered. But the second is, I think we want to step back and rethink at least some of the framing, if not, many of the provisions in our report in the face of this pandemic. And so we're taking that opportunity to do that. And I can't tell you exactly when the report will come out. We're going to work closely with Speaker Pelosi and figure out a time that makes sense. But, we're not abandoning it by any measure. We're just trying to think strategically about when it comes out. And I think you'll be pleased by a lot of what you see, because, as good as something like the Waxman-Markey bill was a decade ago, which was the high water mark for, climate policymaking in Congress, it was not an economy-wide look at the climate crisis. In fact, it wasn't really even looked at as a crisis at that time. We're responding. You talk about this next decade as being so pivotal. That's exactly how we're approaching it in the climate report. And we're looking economy-wide at everything, including natural systems. So I think you'll be pleased, certainly by the scope of what we put out there. We won't presume to very prescriptively say how we're going to tackle every single issue. For example, there will be a recommendation that we embrace carbon pricing, but we're not going to articulate exactly what kind of carbon pricing, where that price should be set, et cetera. So just want to manage your expectations. But I think you'll like a lot of what's in that report when we finally push it out.
Well, you've long been a champion for the role of conserving natural and working lands, and E.O. Wilson gave us kind of a new target in his recently published book to conserve 50% of the lands that are out there and leave them untouched. Is that a topic that will be addressed in the report?
Well, probably not as ambitiously as E.O. Wilson puts it forward. I love his work, and I love the way he stretches our imagination. And I think he's probably right, spot on with the science and everything else. We're going to talk about the need for biodiversity and for resiliency for wildlife and natural systems, and also how they can be part of the climate solution. But I doubt that you're going to see anything as prescriptive as what E.O. Wilson challenges us to do. Plus, he's looking globally, and we're looking primarily at the United States.
Yeah, well, that's great. We look forward to that report. Liz, let me turn this back to you. I just got carried away there on climate.
Building on the climate theme, can you share your thoughts on HR 763 from the Citizens Climate Lobby, which includes a fee on and dividend on oil extraction?
Yeah, so this is one of several carbon pricing models that is being advanced out there, and there is a bill that is bipartisan in the Congress. That's a good thing, to have any Republicans and a whole bunch of moderate Democrats and some progressive Democrats supporting this fee and dividend carbon pricing model. It's a real elegant model. It would be revenue neutral, and kind of like the Alaska Permanent Fund for oil, this would create a bit of a constituency for climate change by turning those carbon revenues right back to the American people. So it's a really interesting and innovative idea. Here's why I'm not co-sponsoring the bill, to be very candid. It also calls for a freeze on EPA regulation under the Clean Air Act, and I can't go there. I cannot suspend any of our rulemaking tools as a price for doing carbon pricing. And I think that reflects a continuing notion that some people bring to this issue, that if you just do carbon pricing, everything takes care of itself, that it's sort of like the silver bullet. And the more I look at this and look at what's been done historically and in other countries, the less I am convinced that carbon pricing really is a silver bullet. I think it's a bunch of buckshot, really, and this carbon pricing has to work in tandem with standard setting and with, in some cases, just bans on things, and with some policies that are command and control, keep it in the ground restrictions on fossil fuel development. I really don't want to give up any of those tools, because my analysis convinces me that betting everything on carbon pricing is not what's going to get this done in the next 10 years. In fact, it takes a long time for markets to mature and to function properly. And even when they do, they often don't work. So I'm not there for a market mechanism only response to climate change. I am there for carbon pricing in conjunction with all these other tools. And that's why I respectfully think that bill needs some more work.
Got it. Thanks for that. Liz, what else do you have teed up there?
So more questions on legislation. The Great American Outdoors Act funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as provides funding to address the maintenance backlog in our national parks. What do you think the prospects are for moving a companion bill through the House, and what is the likely path forward? Could this be done in the context of economic stimulus?
Short answer, yes. I think there's a great opportunity to do this, and it's really strange to have some Republican senators and even President Trump, extolling the Land and Water Conservation Fund and calling for its permanent funding. We all know that Donald Trump doesn't even know what the LWCF is. One of his pollsters has definitely told him that Cory Gardner knows what it is, and that his political life may depend on delivering some of this stuff. So yeah, we've got a real opportunity, and I think there is certainly a lot of desire in the House to get that done.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important also, a lot of these programs, and we've just been doing some work with the Bay Area Council to identify the link between these investments and jobs and future economic resiliency. I mean, FEMA's already told us that addressing climate risk pays out a 6-to-1 dividend on communities to address flood risk, sea level rise, fire risk. And so I hope that people are understanding that. And I think you're getting folks to think more broadly in that realm. So, I guess we just have to keep soldiering in here.
Yeah, part of our challenge in the House will be Rob Bishop. He is no fan of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. You know that he has tried to hijack it and reinvent it and even take some of those royalties and put them back into a fossil fuel internship program and training program for the fossil fuel industry, which is just a grotesque idea for the LWCF. But what he gets out of this is, sort of what he would like to see as his crowning achievement as he leaves Congress, his own parks maintenance backlog funding bill would be part of the mix, presumably. So we should be able to thread that needle and get it done.
Right. I'm curious, are you hearing anything from the Interior Department about their plans or strategy for reopening national parks as we're thinking about how we reopen in California?
No, although, I sort of shudder to think about where they might take us and messages that are probably inherent in whatever they would try to do with Donald Trump looking on. I'm grateful that at least here in California and in my district, our local park superintendents have been deferential to the state public health standards and to our local public health directors. So, I'm national park rich in my district, and they are shoulder to shoulder with our local public health directors in terms of how they're going to restrict access, and then eventually how they're going to gradually reopen and do it in a way that's safe. So we're in good hands, at least here in California.
Great. All right, Liz, let me turn back to you here.
Great. So moving on to our oceans, does your subcommittee also deal with plastics and microplastics in the environment? Why can't we ban plastics and replace them by a better alternative?
Gosh, I would love to do that. That sounds great. My subcommittee does have that jurisdiction, and we are going to, when we can get back on the field, we are going to do some ocean plastics hearings. Congressman Alan Lowenthal has really been leading on this on the House Natural Resources Committee, and he has a bill to address this. But I think we've got to do a lot more. Maybe one of the ways in which this break from the fossil fuel industry that we know we have to do for climate purposes, maybe one of the co-benefits can be that plastics are, sort of another arm of the fossil fuel economy, and the less fossil fuels we use, the less push for plastics everywhere. I hope, but we should tackle plastics head on as well.
Yeah. So I want to we were involved in an effort to qualify an initiative out here to reduce plastics waste across all categories by at least 25% by 2030. And additionally, to put processes in place to drive toward renewable plastic products and overall waste reduction. And I'm disappointed to report to you that when the COVID crisis hit, our ability to get any signatures on the street for initiatives also went out the door. And so we're hoping that if things open up a bit in the month of June, that the Plastics Waste Reduction Initiative, we're just 100,000 or so signatures short, that we can get that qualified for the November 2022 ballot. And I think Californians are really ready to embrace this challenge of moving toward a more renewable, more waste conscious and approach to packaging materials. So I think there is good news out there, but it may be on hold for a bit.
Yeah.
Liz?
Great. So keeping on the theme of oceans, what are the biggest issues facing management of our ocean and fisheries resources?
Well, I think making sure that the pillars of the Magnuson Act, which has been so successful in rebuilding, badly depleted fisheries here in the United States and putting us on a path of science-based management and increasingly ecosystem-based management, we got to make sure that the rigor of the Magnuson Act isn't undermined by folks who they want to err on the side of fishing when there's uncertainty. And I think the science would have us err on the side of caution when there's uncertainty. You're never going to have perfect science on exactly how many fish you have and exactly what's going on out there. But those strict rebuilding timeframes, those strict catch limits and quotas, and the rigor that has been part of the success, the really key to the success in Magnuson, they're under fire from a lot of folks who want to go back to the bad old days of just fishing stuff to total depletion and then moving on to the next fishery. So that's really our challenge. I think climate change brings some opportunities because we've got fish stocks shifting all over the place. And it has forced a lot of people to understand that we really need to address shifting stocks and other aspects of climate change. And that's going to require a lot of science and research. And that science is also critical to these other management pieces. So I think we can do it. I really do. And these listening sessions have given me a lot of confidence that there's tremendous support for holding the rigor in the Magnuson Act. But we will be invited to create, broad off-ramps to science-based management at every turn. And Don Young, unfortunately, has kind of gone over to the dark side on some of these things. So we're going to need to pull him back. He used to be, really good at supporting those key pillars of the Magnuson Act, and we've got some work to do there.
Yeah, we're really hopeful that we can get, to your earlier point about getting to science-based management and getting some matching federal investment out there to really help capitalize fishermen to have online technology to really share data on a daily catch basis more openly and transparently. Because as we've discussed before, these records just sort of sit around in wildlife agencies in paper and metal file boxes and don't really add value. And we can really use technology to do so much better here.
Technology can really help us in the way you just mentioned, Jay, but also on the recreational side. I mean, in a number of places, there's been just a lot more recreational pressure on fisheries and, growing popularity of recreational fishing, greater ability of recreational fishers to just catch an awful lot of fish using the boats and the technology that they now have access to. And so we've got to figure out, given that this is an increasing part of what we're doing out there, how do you manage that? How do you even get data from recreational fishers? It's a totally different situation than all of these commercial operators that have to follow all of these strict reporting requirements, and it's kind of easier to regulate them than it is this diffused and unruly situation with recreational folks. But technology can be part of it. Smartphone apps and other types of reporting and figuring out a way to get them into the mix. They can help us keep better fish counts as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Liz, let me get you have a rally here.
All right, next question. What do you think of carbon offsets? Is the money currently being raised from offsets being used well, or could it be used better?
Well, carbon offsets, I think, are definitely part of the toolbox, and I would never categorically disparage them. At the same time, if you rely entirely on offsets, you're just going to have business as usual continuing in a lot of places and people buying their way into never really changing anything. This is one of the reasons why I think, just setting a carbon price and counting on it to deliver us from the climate crisis doesn't work, because what you'll simply see is, a lot of fossil fuel entities just pass along a higher price and keep doing exactly what they're doing. If you allow offsets in the form of carbon capture and sequestration, which I think is a total myth, I don't think it even exists in a climate-friendly way out there, you're going to see similarly business as usual just continue, and it's going to be harder to make that break from fossil fuel. That, to me, I have concluded the key to getting this done is a really hard break from fossil fuel. And I think all of these elaborate mechanisms that sort of pretend that we can still have an economy built on fossil fuel we've just really got to confront that and reject it. Otherwise, we're not going to get this done.
Mhm.
Great. So moving on to water, what are some of the biggest challenges in water management in California? How can we help develop more resilient water infrastructure? And finally, do you think there is a prospect for an agreement on federal water legislation this year?
Yeah, good question. We're gonna try. I've got a California water bill that we'll be introducing here in the days ahead. It's a forward-looking bill that instead of inviting us to always fight the last water war over the Delta or over a couple of big controversial dams that are unlikely to ever happen, it looks at the kinds of things California water managers are doing on the ground and the kind that a whole bunch of them want to do. Water recycling and dealing with some of these contaminated aquifers that can be remediated and brought back online through advanced treatment. Obviously, cutting edge water use efficiency, across all sectors. There's so much more that we can be doing. Desalination, I believe, is part of the portfolio that has to be in our future because it's going to take pressure off hammered estuaries like the Delta and like some of our Northern California rivers. So I fundamentally believe that our estuaries and our rivers have to stop being the backstop to water demand in the future in California. And these other tools can do the job. Now, the nice thing about them is they'll also be more reliable when you think about climate change going forward. You don't want to be, 20, 30 million Southern Californians relying on this far-flung water import scheme that is very vulnerable to disruption and to volatility with climate change. Far better to have your own resources you can manage locally through stormwater capture and building up your aquifers and doing some smart desalination in places where it makes sense. The kind of water recycling we're seeing in Orange County and other places, pushing the envelope of reuse, that's the future. And it makes sense for reliability, it makes sense for climate resiliency, and it makes sense for those of us that care about rivers and fisheries and natural systems that just have to stop being the backstop for the next increment of water in a growing state like California.
I would be pretty remiss if I didn't talk about Potter Valley here too. I think I don't know that I should call it a debt for nature element of PG&E's bankruptcy, but it's certainly it's been operated as a hydro asset by PG&E. I think the Nature Conservancy and the North Coast Salmon Partnership identified this as a real opportunity to decommission that facility and really move forward and get around the corner. You've been a champion of this effort. Can you talk a little bit about your vision of, and maybe a timeline on how we actually make progress on Potter Valley here and keep other stakeholders on board?
Yeah, this is an exciting opportunity here, Jay, and I'm really glad that TNC has gotten more and more engaged and is working as part of this coalition with CalTrout and Trout Unlimited and the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen and several Native American tribes that see this opportunity to do something big for the Eel River. This was one of California's great salmon rivers, and there have been all kinds of things that have hurt the Eel River over the last 50 years or so, but taking out this dam on the main stem will open up hundreds of miles of really prime spawning habitat, and we'll work on all those other impacts. We've made a lot of progress on mitigating the impacts of forest management, on restoring some impacts from legacy forest practices. Obviously, the marijuana industry has hammered the Eel River watershed, but we're making progress addressing that as well. So this one, the fish passage piece on the main stem eel, is big. And the great thing about it is this dam has outlived its usefulness. Put in place 100 years ago, not for water supply, but for hydropower to help regulate the flow to a downstream diversion at Van Arsdale. It has provided that hydropower, but came to be a major water supply project in the Russian River Basin, because that diversion over into the Russian Basin kind of helped places like Potter Valley and the Ukiah Valley and the Alexander Valley thrive and become, major agricultural hubs. So 100 years later, we don't need that upstream dam anymore for hydro because PG&E wants out of this project.
Yep.
But you got a lot of folks in the Russian River Basin that have come to depend on the water from that diversion. Now, the good news is we've figured out that we can maintain a run-of-the-river diversion to meet those needs in the Russian River Basin, and we can take out that major dam, one of the tallest dams in California, as a matter of fact, and we can open up all that habitat. But it's going to be expensive. It's going to require building trust between these interest groups and between these two basins, and probably doing things together. We'll need to make investments for the water supply reliability on the Russian River side as we take steps to take that dam down. But that coalition's holding together. I've got water users in the Russian, tribes and fishermen and environmentalists in the Eel River Basin, and they are working together saying, we want to go take out that dam and do this project and take over the FERC license. So, so far, so good. It's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting. Appreciate your leadership in this. A couple of your colleagues, I guess this project actually borders 4 congressional districts. We've had a lot of interest in this, and it is I think one of those things that, as you point out, it's a relic that has outlived its usefulness, and we can do something inspiring in restoring the Eel River salmon run and so thank you for your continued shouldering into this and keeping the work moving forward on it. So Liz, why don't we get a couple more questions in if we can, and go forward.
Yeah, I think we have time for 2 more questions. So here's a big question. On what issues would you like TNC to lean in more on?
Well, that's fun to think about. Let's start with the one we just left off on with the Potter Valley Project and this Eel River restoration opportunity. You're already there, helping with the technical work and other things. We really need to develop the constituency for dam removal in Lake County. That's where this dam, the Scott Dam and Lake Pillsbury are. And it's one of the main points of opposition and resistance to this 2-basin solution, because there are some folks who have leases on property, these rentals basically on Forest Service land, and they like their Lake Pillsbury recreation. They're not a large group, but they're really vocal, and they've gotten the Lake County Board of Supervisors and Chamber of Commerce and others in Lake County to believe that this is really a terrible thing for Lake County. It's not. It's actually a really good thing for Lake County. There's going to be a lot of jobs that go along with the dam removal and with the restoration work. There's going to be a live, free-flowing river that continues to course through that area. So anyone who's lucky enough to have a cabin lease or anything else is still going to be in a beautiful place with lots of recreation. It's just going to be a little different. But we need to address the potential political backlash within Lake County. And I think the Nature Conservancy has the relationships and the credibility to really help with that. That is one example. And then help me stop oil drilling in the Arctic Refuge. That is a here and now threat. It's just amazing with $20 a barrel oil, and with every major lender in the United States saying we won't finance drilling in the Arctic, that the Trump administration is pressing ahead with a lease sale that will get pennies on the dollar. It'll be some bottom feeder that comes along and snatches up property rights that will complicate our efforts to protect that place, that really amazing place going forward. We'll have to buy them out in some future date. And we need to just stop this. We need to figure out a way to get the Trump administration to stand down. And I would appreciate your efforts in that regard.
Right. Liz, do you have one more?
I do. So crises like COVID-19 can be catalysts for change. How can we increase the odds that some positive change occurs as we rebuild our economy?
Thank you for that question. I need to spend more time thinking about positive change because, frankly, all of the carnage that I see from the Trump administration can be a little overwhelming, and all of us, are invited into the pit of despair these days, whether it's the malaise from the COVID-19 crisis or just the endless environmental assault that we see from the Trump administration. So the best I can do is look to the way most of us have responded to this imperative of a public health crisis and saving lives and changing our behavior. It's really been remarkable. I go out when I need to go out to a store or to take a walk on the trail, and I just see people stepping up and protecting themselves and others and honoring what the public health experts are telling them they need to do. And that's happening all over the country, blue state, red state. For the most part, vast majorities of the American people have stepped up and accepted the facts and are being part of this collective response. We've got to figure out a way to tap into that same thing, because it's really quite hopeful, I think, and can be part of how we succeed in the face of the climate challenge.
Congressman Huffman, thank you so much for taking this time with the California trustees, our leadership council, our strategy teams, our folks doing the work on the ground and making things happen. And you are an inspiration to us. Your work and from the top of the upper watersheds to getting to science-based flows in our rivers and all the way out to more effective, more balanced, more integrated, more involved management in our oceans, really making fishermen full partners in that are just such critical ways to change natural resources management. And we thank you for everything you're doing, for your staff's accessibility, your interest in new ideas. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for taking this time today. And I'm hoping that you and Susan are doing well with your children at home. I know that we're all juggling these things, and you have school-age children, and going through all of this as well. So take good care. We appreciate your taking time today. And any last words of inspiration for us?
Well, just back at you on all of the nice compliments, Jay. I really appreciate it. And it has just been an honor to work closely with TNC for a long time. I'm excited about the work we have to do together going forward. And I just really thank you for basically embracing excellence when it comes to environmental advocacy and fighting for nature. You are the best of the best, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for all your work, all the energy you bring to it every day, and your spirit. Just you're like one of those fly fishermen mentality. It might not be a good day catching fish, but it's always the best day you can possibly be having when you're out there on the water. And maybe we can get back to those moments soon enough as well. So thank you again for taking this time with us, and thanks for the work you're doing.
Thanks.
Good. And I want to thank our audience out there. I want to thank all of the Nature Conservancy California trustees, our leadership council, our strategy teams, our conservation professionals that provide the inspiration to do this work every day in the field. And we value your work. We take this determining decade as really our charter. Our overall charter, of course, is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends, but we don't have much time to get to sustainable resource management in California. We welcome these moments of dialogue with you in our Determining Decade series, and we'll look forward to having deeper conversations with you across these issues, across these challenging issues of climate change and how we make the planet more resilient for people and nature. And thank you all for all the work that you do on behalf of the Nature Conservancy in California. Be safe, be healthy out there, and take good care. And we appreciate your work with us every day. Thank you.